Hey everyone, and welcome to the first CK3 video on the Iron Workshop. In this video I will talk a bit about my 5 most interesting changes and features that will be available in CK3. I'll have some footage of the game rolling in the background which may or may not be related to the topic being discussed. Now before we begin, I do want to say a couple of words about Crusader Kings II. Crusader Kings II is probably the most unique game in the Paradox lineup, since it's not really a grand strategy game. It's a combination between an RPG game and a strategy game, and that game has really changed Paradox's approach to how they develop their games. The Crusader Kings series is very character based, and Crusader Kings II is really the game that catapulted Paradox from this niche unknown developer to the big and prosperous company that we know it today. And that is because I think that both Paradox even realized that what people basically wanted when they played their grand strategy titles is that they wanted to be the people that are ruling all of these countries and duchies and hold these titles. And that is not something that you actually felt before Crusader Kings II. I think that because of Crusader Kings II, we have these large portraits in Hearts of Iron 4, right? If you're playing as the United States, you feel like you are playing FDR. And that is really a good change that Paradox have made to their games, and the focus that they're putting on the characters, which is no less important than the mechanics of the game. Because ultimately, when we care about the characters that we're playing, that is when we care about the game that we're playing. If the characters weren't interesting and unique, then we would probably not care as much for the countries that these characters are leading, since the characters and the rulers can have a personality and depth. A country, not so much. So with all that said, let's get started, and we'll get started with dynasties, which have seen quite a change in Crusader Kings III. Dynasties are more interconnected and have effects on all members of a dynasty, similar to the bloodline feature that we had in CK2, but it is now more accessible, with control over the dynasty being in the hands of the head of the dynasty. We also have a feature called dynastic legacies, which are what your dynasty is known for, right? So any traditions or any great feats that maybe a member of your dynasty has done, making some dynasties more popular or have more influence than other dynasties, which is a really cool feature. Another change, which is really awesome, and it'll be very interesting to see how it may change the gameplay, is that dynastic heads now have control over the various houses of a dynasty. So each dynasty is split into houses, which are all connected through this one dynasty. And the dynast, which is the head of the dynasty, now has control over these heads of houses. He can call them into war, he can require them to stop a war, and has all of these various actions that he can do with them. And that gives the head of the dynasty really an unimaginable level of control. It will be interesting to see if there will be some kind of a mechanism that will unlock which actions you can actually do with the heads of the houses of your dynasty, but nevertheless it's really an interesting feature which I'm just dying to try out. Next, let's talk about the map, the gorgeous map, and the graphical changes that are coming to the game. So first of all, about the map, well, it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's gorgeous. I don't really have to tell you, you can tell just by looking at the screenshots. But there are changes to the map which are actually improving the gameplay as well. So first of all, baronies are now attached to the counties, and that means that we will no longer see the crazy border gore that we might sometimes see in Crusader Kings II, when you had baronies traveling all over the place and changing hands, and then on the map you would see suddenly in the middle of your sprawling empire these small names that would make it look really weird and annoying. So we no longer have that, which is great. Also, there's really now this cool change between how the map changes from the political mode to the terrain mode when you zoom in and out. And that change is gradual and it looks very smooth and very cool, which will probably reduce the amount of times that you have to actually go and change manually the map modes when you want to see different kinds of information, right? So that is done just by zooming in and out of the map, which really enhances the gameplay and allows you to do less of that button clicking, which you might have to do in Crusader Kings II. Now a bit about the characters. So the characters are obviously a big improvement from Crusader Kings II, where they looked like dummies, right? They looked really weird. And especially when you had children and they would not look like their parents, and it looked so weird, right? So now children will resemble their parents more graphically, right? So visually you will see how they are related. Also, characters now have unique clothing, which represents their status and their position in the world. So for example, if you're a king, then your clothing will reflect that. You will be finely dressed. You will not look like just some simple courtier that doesn't have any land and doesn't have any money, right? So your clothes will look much different. Also, characters are no longer static. So in Crusader Kings II, all the characters were just staring like that, sideways, and they had no real personality to their face and no expressions, and this has now significantly changed. So characters now have expressions on their faces, and they also have poses. So we are no longer looking just at the face of the character, but we actually see their body language as well, which reflects their mood and might also reflect their attitude towards other characters, or obviously towards the player character, and so on. Another great feature coming up in Crusader Kings III is the hook system. Now, personally, I think that it's a terrible name for the system. I'm sure that they could have come up with a better one, but it's what we've got. So what are hooks? We had something similar in Crusader Kings II. If your character had discovered something awful about another character, he could have chosen to reveal the secret, right? To shame that person and to let everybody know that he has done that wicked, evil, whatever thing. But you didn't really have any options to manage it. So you had an event popping up and then you could have used it or saved it for later. And how exactly you interacted with it later, it wasn't very clear. So there were a lot of problems with accessibility and how you interact with these secrets, right? Now we have a dedicated system for that, and that is the hook system. So every time that you discover some kind of a secret about another character that obviously that character doesn't want the whole world to know, for example, if they're having an affair, or if they murdered somebody, or if they spread lies about another character, you can actually hold that secret against that character, and then when the time comes and you need them to do something for you, you can use it. So that is the hook, right? So that is the hook that you have over them. And whenever you need them to do what you want, you can just use the hook, and then obviously you lose it. But the really cool thing about this is that you can also now generate these hooks. So you can now just come up with these stories about other characters, and if these stories are actually substantial enough, or if they're good enough, then other characters might actually believe them, and your hook will be effective against that character. So that is a really cool thing. That is not something that we could do in Crusader Kings II. It was completely random. But now, as I said, we have much more control over it, and no doubt that will make the task of getting what you want out of your courtiers and your vassals much more interesting and easy to handle. Feature number 4 are spouses that now have their own council position and their own unique actions. In Crusader Kings II, spouses were actually quite important. So if, for example, you made some mistakes with your ruler, a spouse could really help to balance his traits and skills so that your kingdom doesn't come apart. But when it came time to put your spouse on the council, which is something that a spouse sometimes actually demanded or asked for, That could really cause a problem, because if you had a powerful vassal on that council position and you would put your spouse instead of him, because maybe your spouse has better stats to help with that council position, then that could obviously upset that powerful vassal. Luckily now this is no longer the case, so your spouses have their own unique council position and you don't have to make that trade-off. But in Crusader Kings II, their presence only gave this passive bonus to your skills and you couldn't really give them a unique job to do. Now in Crusader Kings III, they have their own unique jobs that they can do. So they have a unique assist ruler task, which just gives a boost to all of your skills. Or you can actually ask them to help with a unique skill that you might be lacking in. And that is very nice since it allows you to micromanage these things and actually supplement some of the skills that your ruler might be lacking in for the same skill that your spouse may actually have an abundance of. So that is a really interesting change to the interaction between a ruler and his spouse, and should be interesting to see how it affects gameplay. And now let's end with 3 changes to the game which I think will really change the way that we play. First of all is that raiding armies can no longer retreat when they are on a raid, and that is a really welcome change, because for anyone who played Crusader Kings II, chasing after those raiders all over the map when they were running all the time, it was a really annoying thing to do. So luckily it seems like we will no longer have to do that. God bless. Second is that raiders no longer siege the holdings that they're raiding, so there is no siege mechanics involved, and that is very nice since it means that they will not be destroying fortifications and doing things like that. They're just raiding the countryside. The really cool thing about this is that these raiders will no longer take over counties and baronies, which was really annoying in Crusader Kings II since it didn't really make much sense. I mean, raiders just come to raid, they don't take over holdings to become the rulers of these holdings. They raid and they leave, so it makes much more sense that they will no longer siege castles and do things like that, which raiders just aren't supposed to do. And obviously if they don't take over these holdings, then you no longer need to take them back by having another siege to take the holding back under your control. And the last change, which I personally really liked, is the new stress system, which is meant to balance how your character acts in relation to their personality. So for example, if your character was a good character throughout all of the game, and suddenly you are doing this really out of character action, for example like an execution, and that is not a character which is used to doing executions or wants to do executions, but perhaps he had to, then that will increase the stress level of the character and will really make him sometimes even depressed when he's doing something which he doesn't want to do or isn't used to doing and is totally out of character. And that, in my opinion, really makes the characters more believable, because when somebody in real life acts out of their character and does something that they usually don't do, like murder, that has real repercussions on their psyche. And that's not something that we would have seen in Crusader Kings II, where your character could be benevolent and this really good guy and then suddenly just execute somebody, and the worst thing that you would get is a malice to the opinion of your vassals, which seems like a really small price to pay and makes your character empty. Alright, so these are all the features in Crusader Kings III that I'm personally excited about. The game obviously has many more features and improvements that I did not mention in the video, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet, and these are the features that I personally cared about the most. I have to say that Crusader Kings III is the first title in a while that I'm really excited about. I haven't purchased Imperator Rome because personally that game did not appeal to me at all, and the dev diaries did not make me excited about it also. The other expansions for EU4 also did not excite me too much, but Crusader Kings III is such an improvement from CK2, a game which I really loved playing, that I just can't ignore it. And hopefully it will be as good as it seems to be in the dev diaries, and I personally can't wait to play it and mod it and to show all of you how to mod it as well. And we will no doubt have some wacky and exciting mods for CK3, just like we did for Crusader Kings II. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next video on the Iron Workshop. Bye bye. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. The algorithm and me will be very happy. Here are more videos I make. If you like my stuff, consider subscribing to be notified when new content is available. The Iron Workshop lives and thrives thanks to the continued support of my Patreons. If you're willing and able, you can support me on Patreon for just $1 and get access to exclusive and early content. See you around.